Fleeing from a storm, Mountaineer hides in abandoned mansion and finds a lost treasure. Marcus Johnson felt his heart racing as the storm intensified around him. The 42-year-old experienced trail guide had faced many difficult situations in the Appalachian Mountains, but this one was becoming too dangerous to remain outdoors. It was then that through the heavy rain he spotted an old mansion atop the hill. The windows were covered with old wooden planks, but a faint light shone on the second floor, indicating someone still lived there. Marcus had no choice but to seek shelter in that place which seemed forgotten by time. The rain hammered relentlessly on his green trail jacket as he approached the imposing structure. His steps sank into the mud forming on the uneven ground, and the wind made the surrounding trees dance in a frightening way. Even with his 2 decades of experience guiding tourists through the mountains, Marcus had rarely faced a storm as violent as this one. The mansion before him told stories of better times. The peeling paint on the exterior walls and the completely abandoned garden suggested the place hadn't received care for many years. Still, that light on the second floor reassured him, for it meant he wouldn't be intruding on a completely empty property. Circling the building in search of a suitable entrance, Marcus found a side door leading to the back of the house. Before knocking, he hesitated for a few seconds, rearranging in his mind the words he would use to explain his situation. After all, it wasn't common for a stranger to appear in a storm asking for shelter. The door opened before he even knocked, revealing a lady with graying hair and tired eyes. She must have been about 65, and her face showed signs she had been crying recently. In her trembling hands, she held a letter yellowed with age, as if it had been read and reread countless times. "Please don't be alarmed," Marcus said immediately, pulling back the hood of his jacket to show he meant no harm. "I'm Marcus Johnson, a trail guide from the region. The storm is very dangerous, and I need a place to take shelter until it passes." The woman observed him for a few moments, assessing his appearance and his words. Something in her face showed that she, too, was in need of company, perhaps more than he needed shelter. After a pause that seemed to last an eternity, she nodded and stepped back from the door. "Come in, please," she said in a soft voice, yet laden with melancholy. "My name is Elizabeth Carter. This house has belonged to my family for 3 generations, but it's been closed since my eldest son left after a terrible argument 15 years ago." Marcus entered carefully, removing his soaked backpack and hiking pole. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior, but it also carried a heavy atmosphere of abandonment and sadness. Old furniture was covered with white sheets, and Marcus noticed that all the photographs on the walls were covered with cloths, as if someone couldn't bear the memories they brought. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Elizabeth," replied Marcus, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want to be a bother, but I truly had nowhere else to go. This storm caught everyone in the region by surprise." Elizabeth led him to a spacious and cozy kitchen, which seemed to be the only room in the house still in regular use. A solid wood table occupied the center, surrounded by chairs that seemed to have witnessed many family conversations over the years. She offered him a clean towel and a hot coffee, simple gestures that carried genuine generosity. As he dried himself, Marcus noticed that Elizabeth had picked up the yellowed letter again, and her hands were trembling slightly. It was clear she was going through a difficult moment, and the presence of a stranger might be welcome as a distraction from her painful thoughts. "Forgive my curiosity, Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus cautiously, "but it seems this letter brings important news. If you want to talk about what's happening, sometimes it helps to speak with someone outside the situation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing." Elizabeth lifted her eyes from the letter and met Marcus's sincere gaze. There was something in his expression that conveyed trust and understanding, perhaps the result of years of listening to the stories of the tourists he guided through the mountains. After a moment of hesitation, she sighed deeply and began to speak. "This letter arrived this morning," she said, carefully smoothing the paper. "It's from the family lawyer, informing me about some documents my late husband left hidden in the attic of this house. Apparently there's a collection of letters he wrote over the years, but never showed me." Marcus realized there was much more behind this story than Elizabeth was revealing. The entire mansion breathed untold secrets, and the heavy atmosphere suggested deep family matters remained unresolved. He decided to listen patiently, understanding that sometimes people need time to tell their truths. "The problem is, I've never had the courage to go up to the attic alone," continued Elizabeth, her voice choked. "Since William passed 2 years ago, this house has become too big and too quiet for me. Every room brings memories that are sometimes hard to bear." William was clearly the deceased husband, and Marcus could imagine how challenging it must be for a woman of Elizabeth's age to manage such a large property laden with family history alone. The presence of the covered photographs and the general atmosphere of the house confirmed she was struggling to process her loss. "If you'd like," offered Marcus gently, "I can help you go up to the attic and look for those documents. It's not good to leave important matters unresolved, and perhaps those letters will bring some kind of clarity or peace." The relief on Elizabeth's face was immediate and evident. It was as if she had been waiting for someone to offer exactly that help, but didn't know how to ask. She nodded several times, and for the first time since Marcus arrived, a small smile appeared on her face. They went up to the mansion's second floor, passing through hallways decorated with old wallpaper and furniture that clearly had decades of history. Marcus noticed everything was impeccably clean, indicating Elizabeth kept the house in order, despite her sadness. The staircase leading to the attic was narrow and steep, explaining why she avoided going up alone. The attic was dusty and poorly lit, but neatly arranged. Wooden boxes and old trunks were laid out systematically, as if William had spent significant time organizing his belongings before hiding the letters. Marcus used the flashlight from his hiking gear to better illuminate the space. "There," said Elizabeth, pointing to a dark leather trunk in the farthest corner. "The lawyer said the letters are in a brown leather suitcase, probably inside or behind that trunk." Marcus went to the indicated spot and, after carefully moving the heavy trunk, found an old leather suitcase partially hidden. The suitcase was closed with a small latch, but it wasn't locked. When she opened it, both were surprised by what they found inside. Hundreds of letters were organized in bundles, separated by ribbons of different colors. Some looked very old, with yellowed paper and faded ink, while others were more recent. Each bundle had a handwritten label with dates and names, suggesting a meticulous organization system maintained over many years. "My God," murmured Elizabeth, delicately picking up one of the bundles. "So many letters. William wrote all these and never told me anything." Marcus noticed there were at least 6 or 7 different bundles, and some of the names on the labels were familiar even to him. One bundle was marked, "For Elizabeth, never sent," another with, "For Benjamin, letters of apology," and a third simply said, "Memories and Confessions." The discovery was clearly impacting Elizabeth deeply. Her hands trembled as she held the letters, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. It was evident this discovery would bring significant revelations about her husband's life, and perhaps about the family as a whole. "Let's go downstairs and read these letters calmly," suggested Marcus. "It's not good to stay here in the dusty attic, and you need to sit down to process what we're going to find out." Back in the kitchen, they arranged the letters on the table, organizing the bundles according to the dates on the labels. Marcus made more coffee, while Elizabeth decided where to begin. The storm continued to roar outside, but inside the kitchen there was an atmosphere of expectation and discovery that made the sound of the rain less intimidating. "I'll start with the letters for me," said Elizabeth, picking up the bundle marked "For Elizabeth, never sent." "I need to understand what William wanted to tell me, but never could." The first letter was dated 15 years ago, exactly around the time of the argument that drove their son from home. Marcus watched Elizabeth's expression gradually change as she read, shifting from curiosity to surprise, and then to something that seemed like understanding mixed with regret. "What does it say?" asked Marcus gently, respecting the fact that she might choose to keep the content private. Elizabeth looked up from the letter, and Marcus saw tears streaming down her face. But they didn't seem like tears of just sadness. There was something more complex in her expression, as if she were discovering truths that changed her understanding of past events. William writes here that he knew where Benjamin was living after he left home, she said with a choked voice. He says he kept an eye on him from a distance during the first months, making sure he was okay, but he never told me because he thought I would be even more hurt. This revelation hit Marcus like a rock. For 15 years, Elizabeth had believed her son had simply disappeared after the argument, when in fact her husband knew exactly where he was and chose to keep it a secret. The complexity of the family situation was becoming clearer and more painful. "Benjamin is your son?" asked Marcus, though the answer was obvious. "My eldest son," confirmed Elizabeth. "He left home after a terrible argument with his father about family money. Benjamin wanted to use part of his grandparents' inheritance to help needy families in the region, but William thought that was wasteful. The argument was so ugly that Benjamin left the same day and never came back." Marcus began to understand the depth of the family tragedy that had unfolded in this house. An argument about money had separated father and son, but apparently there were deeper layers of misunderstandings and wounded pride that prevented any reconciliation over the years. "Keep reading the letters," encouraged Marcus. "Perhaps William can better explain his motivations in the other letters." Elizabeth opened the second letter from the same bundle, this one dated a few months after the first. Her expression changed again as she read, this time showing more confusion than sadness. It was as if each letter revealed a different facet of her husband that she had never known. "This one is even more confusing," she said. "William writes that he went to the town where Benjamin was living and saw him from a distance working with poor families. He says he was impressed with our son's dedication, but that he was too ashamed to approach him and admit that perhaps Benjamin was right." The situation was becoming clearer to Marcus. William seemed to have been a man caught between his pride and his love for his son, unable to publicly admit that he had misjudged Benjamin's intentions. This family dynamic was more common than many people imagined, especially in older generations raised with rigid values about hierarchy and paternal authority. "How many letters are in this bundle?" asked Marcus. Elizabeth counted quickly. There seemed to be about 20 letters, written over 15 years. The most recent is from a few months before William passed away. The temporal density of the letters suggested that William had struggled with this situation for the rest of his life after his son left. It hadn't been an issue he simply forgot or got over. On the contrary, it seemed to have been a constant source of reflection and regret. Elizabeth opened a letter from the middle of the chronological period, dated about 8 years ago. This time her reaction was even more intense, and she had to pause reading several times to control her emotions. Marcus waited patiently, understanding that she was processing revelations that fundamentally changed her understanding of her marriage and her family. "Marcus," she finally said, "this letter is about me. William writes that he loves me more than he can express, but that he feels he failed me as a husband by letting the family fall apart. He says I deserve to know the truth about Benjamin, but that he's afraid I'll never forgive him for hiding information for so long." This revelation added another layer of complexity to the situation. William had not only kept his son's whereabouts a secret, but was also aware that this constituted a betrayal of his wife's trust. He was caught between multiple loyalties and fears, unable to find a way to fix the situation without causing more pain. Marcus realized that Elizabeth needed a moment to process this information before continuing. He stood up and went to the window to watch the storm, giving her some emotional space. The rain was still heavy, but the thunder was moving away, suggesting the worst of the storm had passed. "Mrs. Elizabeth," he said gently, "these discoveries must be very difficult to process. Perhaps we should take a break, and you could tell me more about Benjamin and what family life was like before the argument." Elizabeth nodded gratefully and put away the letters she had read. It was evident she needed to organize her thoughts before diving deeper into the revelations still to come. She stood up and prepared a simple snack, a domestic ritual that seemed to help her calm down. "Benjamin was always a special child," she began as she arranged some cookies on a plate. "From a young age, he showed concern for other people, especially those who had less than we did. When he was 12, he asked us to give his Christmas presents to needy children in town." Marcus could imagine how this personality trait could have created tensions in a traditional family. Excessive generosity, especially in financial matters, often created conflicts between generations with different perspectives on responsibility and economic security. William came from a very conservative family, continued Elizabeth. His father built a small empire of rural properties through hard work and strict saving. For William, spending money on strangers was almost a betrayal of his ancestors' sacrifices. The family dynamic was becoming clearer. William had been raised with values of preservation and wealth accumulation, while Benjamin was born with a naturally generous personality. This fundamental difference in perspective on money and social responsibility had created a tension that eventually exploded in the argument that split the family. "And what was your position in the argument?" asked Marcus carefully. Elizabeth paused for a long moment before answering, and Marcus realized this was a question she had been avoiding facing for 15 years. Her expression showed that she carried her own guilt and regrets about the events of that terrible day. "I tried to stay neutral," she finally said, "but when the argument heated up, I ended up supporting William. At the time, I thought Benjamin was being irresponsible and ungrateful. I said things I'm ashamed to have said." This confession revealed another dimension of the family tragedy. Benjamin had not only been rejected by his father, but also by his mother, making his decision to leave even more painful and justified. Marcus began to understand why William's letters were so laden with guilt and regret. "What kind of things did you say?" asked Marcus gently, though he knew this could be a very painful question. Elizabeth closed her eyes and took a deep breath before answering. It was evident that these words had haunted her for years, and speaking about them required considerable courage on her part. "I said he was an irresponsible dreamer who didn't understand the value of hard work," she said in a barely audible voice. "I said if he wanted to help the poor, he should first learn to value what his family had built for him. And I said that if he left home over this, he shouldn't bother coming back." Marcus felt the emotional impact of those words. In the heat of a family argument, Elizabeth had essentially banished her own son from the home, supporting her husband's rigid position. Now, 15 years later, and with the perspective that only time can bring, she clearly saw those words as one of the greatest mistakes of her life. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus carefully, "people say things they don't mean when they're angry or scared. What matters is that now you have the opportunity to better understand what happened, and perhaps find a way to make things right." "But how?" she asked desperately. "Benjamin left 15 years ago. I don't even know if he's still alive, if he married, if he has children. How can I fix something I broke so completely?" Marcus pointed to the unread letters on the table. "Perhaps the answer is in William's other correspondence. If he really kept track of Benjamin over the years, there might be information about where he is now and how his life is." This possibility brought a spark of hope to Elizabeth's face. She quickly picked up the bundle of letters marked "For Benjamin, Letters of Apology," and began to open the first correspondence. Marcus watched her expression change again as she read, this time showing a mixture of hope and anxiety. "What does William say in these letters?" asked Marcus. "This first letter is an apology," said Elizabeth with a choked voice. "William writes that he realized shortly after the argument that he had misjudged Benjamin's intentions. He says that pride stopped him from going after his son that same day, and that each day that passed made it harder to admit the mistake." Marcus nodded understandingly. Pride was often the greatest obstacle to family reconciliations, especially for men of William's generation who had been raised with the belief that admitting fault was a sign of weakness. Elizabeth opened the second letter from the stack, and her expression changed to one of genuine surprise. It was as if she were discovering a completely new aspect of her late husband, someone who had kept deep feelings and thoughts hidden throughout their marriage. "This letter is even more revealing," she said. "William writes that he went to the city where Benjamin was living. This was about a year after the argument, and spent an entire day observing our son from a distance. He describes how Benjamin was working at a community center, helping families get documents and access to social programs. This revelation brought a new perspective on Benjamin. He hadn't simply run away from home in a rebellious act. He had found a constructive way to channel his passion for helping others. This confirmed that his original intentions were genuine and mature, not just romantic ideas from an inexperienced young man. William goes on to describe how impressed he was with Benjamin's maturity and efficiency, continued Elizabeth. He writes that our son had grown up and become exactly the type of man any father should be proud to call his son. Marcus could see that these revelations were simultaneously comforting and painful for Elizabeth. It was wonderful to discover that Benjamin had become a successful and selfless person, but also painful to realize that 15 years of family separation had been unnecessary and based on misunderstandings and pride. "Is there something in this letter about where Benjamin is now?" asked Marcus. Elizabeth continued reading and then stopped abruptly, her hands trembling as she held the paper. Marcus realized she had found particularly important or emotional information and waited patiently for her to process what she had read. "Marcus," she said in an almost whispered voice, "William writes here the address where Benjamin was working when he visited him. And there's a note saying he confirmed that Benjamin was still working there until a few months before William died." This was the information Marcus had hoped to find. If William had kept updated information about Benjamin until recently, there was a real chance he was still in the same location, or at least in the same region. This meant the possibility of reconciliation wasn't just a dream, but something potentially achievable. "Where is this address?" asked Marcus. "In Riverside," replied Elizabeth. "It's the neighboring town, less than an hour's drive from here. The address is for a social assistance center called Renewed Hope." Marcus knew Riverside well, as he often took tourist groups on trails in that region. It was a medium-sized town with a close-knit community, exactly the type of place where someone like Benjamin could make a significant impact working in social assistance. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus carefully, "would you like to try to contact Benjamin? With these letters as evidence of William's true intentions, perhaps it's possible to explain what really happened all these years." The suggestion clearly terrified and excited Elizabeth at the same time. Her hands trembled as she considered the possibility, and Marcus could see the internal conflict between her desperate desire to see her son again and her fear of rejection after 15 years of separation. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "What if he's built a new life and doesn't want me in it? What if he never forgives me for the things I said that day?" Marcus understood these fears perfectly. After so much time apart, there were no guarantees that an attempt at reconciliation would succeed, but he also knew that not trying meant guaranteeing the separation would last forever, and that Elizabeth would spend the rest of her life wondering about lost possibilities. "Those are valid concerns," said Marcus, "but consider this. You have evidence here that William regretted the argument and acknowledged that Benjamin was right. That completely changes the narrative of what happened. Also, 15 years is enough time for wounds to heal and for people to gain perspective." Elizabeth picked up another letter from the stack and opened it with trembling hands. This time, her reaction was immediate and intense. She began to cry openly, but Marcus noticed these weren't just tears of sadness. There was something more complex in her expression, as if she had discovered something that fundamentally changed her understanding of the situation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. "What does that letter say?" asked Marcus gently. "It's a letter William wrote to Benjamin just 6 months before he died," said Elizabeth through tears. "He writes that he's discovered he has heart problems and may not have much time. He begs for forgiveness and says the only thing he wants before he goes is to see his son again and introduce him to the grandchildren he's never met." This revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Benjamin had children, grandchildren Elizabeth had never known, and William had died knowing of their existence without ever getting the chance to meet them or reconcile the family. The tragedy was even deeper than Marcus had imagined. "Benjamin has children?" asked Marcus, though the answer was evident. "Apparently 2 children," said Elizabeth, wiping her tears. "William writes that he got information about them through acquaintances in Riverside, an 8-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. My grandchildren, Marcus. I have grandchildren I've never seen who don't even know I exist. The family situation was revealing itself to be even more complex and emotionally charged. This wasn't just about a reconciliation between mother and son, but also about the possibility of Elizabeth meeting her grandchildren and two children discovering they had a grandmother they never knew existed. "Does the letter say anything about Benjamin's wife?" asked Marcus. Elizabeth continued reading and found the information she was looking for. William writes that her name is Jennifer and that she works as a teacher at the local school. He says she seems like a wonderful woman and that Benjamin chose well. Marcus was beginning to form a plan in his mind. If Benjamin had built a stable life in Riverside with a wife and children, it suggested he had overcome the traumas of his youth and become an emotionally balanced person. That could mean he might be more open to reconciliation than Elizabeth feared. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus, "I believe you should try to contact Benjamin. With these letters as evidence, it's clear there were misunderstandings on all sides. Besides, now there are grandchildren involved, and the children deserve to know their entire family." The logic of the argument was convincing, but Marcus could see that Elizabeth was still wrestling with her fears. 15 years of separation had created an emotional barrier that would be difficult to overcome, even with evidence that reconciliation was possible. "But how?" she asked. "I can't just show up at his house after so long. What if he refuses to see me? What if he doesn't believe I've changed my mind about the things I said?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. A direct approach could indeed be too shocking after such a long separation. It was necessary to find a more gradual and less threatening way to re-establish contact. "Perhaps we could start with a letter," suggested Marcus. "You could write to him explaining the discovery of William's correspondence and asking for a chance to talk. That would give him time to process the information and decide if he wants to proceed with contact." The idea seemed to appeal to Elizabeth, as it offered a way to reach out without forcing an immediate confrontation. She nodded thoughtfully, considering the words she might use in such an important letter. "But what would I say?" she asked. "How can I explain 15 years of silence in a letter?" "You could start with today's discoveries," suggested Marcus. "Explain that you found William's letters and that they revealed truths you didn't know. Tell him about the regret he expressed and how it changed your understanding of what happened that day." Elizabeth stood up and went to a drawer from which she took paper and a pen. It was evident that the idea of writing to Benjamin had captured her imagination and given her a sense of purpose she hadn't had in a long time. Marcus watched as she sat down and began to draft her first words. "Dear Benjamin," she began to write, but then stopped and looked at Marcus. "Is that how I should start? After so long?" "Start from the heart," said Marcus. "Be honest about your feelings and what you discovered today. Authenticity is more important than finding the perfect words." Elizabeth began writing again, and Marcus could see the words were flowing more easily this time. As she wrote, he decided to read some of the other letters to better understand the family dynamics and perhaps find more useful information for the current situation. He picked up the bundle marked Memories and Confessions and opened the first letter. It was dated 10 years ago and was clearly written during a moment of deep personal reflection. William described his own insecurities as a father and how he had allowed the fear of losing control over the family to lead him to make decisions that ultimately cost him his relationship with his son. The letter revealed a man far more complex and vulnerable than the rigid image he had projected during the family argument. William confessed that he had envied Benjamin's courage to follow his convictions, even when it meant challenging paternal authority. He acknowledged that his own fear of social judgment had influenced his negative reaction to his son's altruistic plans. Marcus continued reading and found a particularly revealing passage. William wrote about how he had been raised by an extremely authoritarian father who never showed emotion or admitted mistakes. He recognized that he had reproduced this pattern with Benjamin, perpetuating a cycle of poor communication that had damaged generations of family relationships. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus, gently interrupting her writing, "I found something interesting in these other letters. William writes about being raised by a strict father and how that influenced his way of dealing with Benjamin. It seems he understood he was repeating harmful family patterns. Elizabeth looked up from her letter and nodded. William's father was truly a very difficult person, she said. He never showed affection or approval, and William always struggled to earn his approval. I think he was afraid that if he were too permissive with Benjamin, he would be a weak father. This revelation added another layer of understanding to the family situation. William had not acted out of malice or lack of love, but out of fear and insecurity based on his own deficient upbringing. This made the family tragedy even more poignant, as it showed how harmful patterns can perpetuate through generations, even when people have good intentions. Marcus continued reading William's letters and found more evidence of his emotional growth over the years. In a letter dated 5 years ago, William described how he had secretly begun working with local charity organizations, channeling money to exactly the type of cause Benjamin had championed. It was as if he were trying to honor his son's vision anonymously, since he didn't have the courage to publicly admit he had changed his mind. "Elizabeth," said Marcus, "you need to see this." William not only changed his mind about Benjamin's ideas, but began financially supporting charity organizations. He was secretly doing exactly what Benjamin wanted to do with the family money. Elizabeth stopped writing and took the letter Marcus offered her. Her expression changed to one of total surprise as she read about her husband's secret philanthropic activities. It was evident she had no knowledge of these donations, suggesting William had kept many secrets throughout his life. "I had no idea about any of this," she said with amazement. "William never told me he was donating money to charity. In fact, whenever the subject came up, he still talked as if he thought helping strangers was a waste." "It seems he was ashamed to admit he had changed his mind," said Marcus. "Perhaps he thought it would make him seem weak or inconsistent. Unfortunately, that pride prevented him from sharing his evolution with you and with Benjamin." The discovery was fundamentally changing Elizabeth's understanding of her husband and of the last years of their marriage. It was painful to realize William had carried so many secrets and regrets alone, but also comforting to know he had truly evolved as a person, even if he couldn't express it openly. "This changes everything," said Elizabeth. "If William truly supported Benjamin's ideas and was secretly doing what our son wanted to do, then the entire basis of our family argument was based on misunderstandings." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. And now you have concrete evidence of this to show Benjamin. This not only proves that William regretted it, but that he recognized Benjamin was right from the start." Elizabeth returned to her letter with renewed energy. The discoveries had given her much more material to work with, and she now had concrete evidence of a change of heart that she could share with her son. Marcus watched as she wrote more enthusiastically, clearly inspired by the revelations about her husband. As Elizabeth wrote, Marcus explored the last bundle of letters, this one marked only with "final letters." They were correspondences written in the last months of William's life, when he knew his heart condition was deteriorating. The tone of these letters was different from the earlier ones, more urgent and desperate, but also more honest and direct. In the first letter of this bundle, William wrote directly about his own mortality and how the approach of his departure had given him clarity about what truly mattered in life. He expressed deep regret for having allowed pride to destroy his family and for not having had the courage to seek reconciliation while there was still time. The most impactful letter in this final bundle was jointly addressed to Elizabeth and Benjamin. It was as if William knew it would only be read after his passing, and had used this opportunity to say all the truths he couldn't express in life. Marcus decided that this letter should be read by Elizabeth immediately, as it could provide the final words needed to motivate her to seek reconciliation. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Marcus carefully, "there is a letter here that William wrote for you and Benjamin together. It seems to be one of the last things he wrote. Perhaps you should read it before finishing your own letter." Elizabeth immediately stopped writing and reached out to receive the final correspondence from her husband. Marcus could see the anxiety on her face. She was clearly prepared for both comforting revelations and painful truths. The letter was longer than the previous ones, and Marcus watched Elizabeth read in silence, her expression constantly changing. Sometimes she smiled, other times tears appeared in her eyes. and at some moment she seemed to be processing particularly significant revelations. Finally, she finished reading and looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed sadness, relief, and determination. It was evident that the letter had provided exactly the kind of clarity and motivation she needed to proceed with her plans for reconciliation. "What did William say in that final letter?" asked Marcus. "He asks for our forgiveness," said Elizabeth, with a choked but firm voice. "He acknowledges that he was stubborn and proud, and that he allowed small differences of opinion to destroy what should have been most important, our family unity. He confesses that he knew where Benjamin was all these years and asks forgiveness both from me and from our son for having kept that a secret." Marcus nodded encouragingly, realizing that this final confession was giving Elizabeth the validation she needed for her own future actions. "But the most important part," continued Elizabeth, "is that he writes about his secret donations to charity and explains they were inspired by Benjamin. He says our son was right from the start about using family resources to help other people, and that it took him years to gain enough humility to admit it." "And what else?" asked Marcus, sensing there was more content in the letter. "William writes that he left instructions with the lawyer so that, after his passing, a significant amount of the family estate would be specifically allocated to the social work Benjamin does. It's as if he finally wanted to officially support our son's dreams." This revelation was extraordinary. Not only had William changed his mind about Benjamin's ideas, but he had taken concrete steps to support them even after his own passing. This demonstrated a level of regret and growth that went far beyond words written in letters. "Does this mean Benjamin will receive an inheritance specifically intended for his social work?" asked Marcus. "Yes," confirmed Elizabeth. "And William writes that he hopes this will show Benjamin that his ideas were always valid, and that his father finally recognized it, even if it took him a long time to admit it." Marcus realized that these revelations completely changed the dynamics of the situation. Elizabeth was not just trying to reconcile with her son, she had concrete evidence that William had evolved and left a legacy that completely validated Benjamin's life perspective. "With all this information," said Marcus, "I believe your letter to Benjamin has a very solid foundation. You are not just asking for forgiveness for past misunderstandings, but offering evidence that the entire family has recognized he was right." Elizabeth nodded and returned to writing her letter with renewed energy. Now she had a complete story to tell about discoveries, regrets, personal evolution, and the posthumous validation of the ideas that had caused the family separation. Marcus watched as she wrote more confidently, incorporating the revelations from William's letters. When she finished writing, Elizabeth reread her letter several times, making small adjustments and additions. It was evident she wanted every word to be perfect. Understanding this might be her only opportunity to explain 15 years of separation and pave the way for reconciliation. "May I read your letter?" asked Marcus. Sometimes an outside perspective can help identify if the message is clear and convincing. Elizabeth handed him the letter, and Marcus read it carefully. The correspondence was touching and honest, beginning with an explanation about the discovery of William's letters and evolving into a sincere expression of regret for the cruel words spoken during the family argument. Elizabeth had skillfully incorporated the revelations about William's secret philanthropic activities and about the inheritance intended for Benjamin's social work. "It's an excellent letter," said Marcus sincerely. "It's honest, specific, and offers concrete evidence of change. I believe any son would be moved to receive correspondence like this from his mother." "But how will I deliver it?" asked Elizabeth. "I can't just put it in the mail after 15 years of silence. That would be too impersonal." Marcus thought about it. She was right. After so much time apart, a letter sent by mail could easily be discarded or misinterpreted. A more personal approach was needed to ensure Benjamin actually received and read the message. "What if we went to Riverside and I helped you deliver the letter in person?" suggested Marcus. "We wouldn't need to force an immediate conversation. We could simply ensure he receives the letter and let him decide when and if he wants to respond." The suggestion clearly both attracted and terrified Elizabeth at the same time. The idea of seeing Benjamin again after 15 years was simultaneously everything she most desired and her greatest source of anxiety. Marcus could see the internal conflict in her expression. "What if he refuses to accept the letter?" she asked. "What if he sees me and just walks away?" "Then at least you will know you tried," said Marcus gently. "But consider that 15 years is enough time for wounds to heal. Benjamin is now a mature man with his own family. It's possible he has also missed the family and is open to reconciliation." Elizabeth walked to the window and observed that the storm had diminished significantly. The sky was still cloudy, but the rain had stopped and the winds had calmed. It was as if the weather was reflecting her own emotional transition, from turbulence to calm, from despair to hope. "All right," she said finally, turning to Marcus with determination on her face. "Let's go to Riverside. I need to try to talk to my son." Marcus smiled encouragingly. "Excellent decision. Let's prepare William's letters too. They will be important evidence to support what you're saying in your letter." They carefully organized all of William's correspondence, specifically selecting those that demonstrated his evolution of thought and his regrets. Marcus suggested they also bring the final letter addressed to both Elizabeth and Benjamin, as it contained the most direct and impactful confessions. As they prepared for the trip, Elizabeth grew increasingly nervous but also more determined. It was evident that discovering the letters had given her not only motivation, but also confidence that she had something meaningful to offer her son beyond simple apologies. "Marcus," she said while placing the letters in a special folder, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done today. If you hadn't shown up here during the storm, I would never have had the courage to go up to the attic and find these letters." "Sometimes fate places us exactly where we need to be," replied Marcus. "Perhaps the storm wasn't just a coincidence, but an opportunity for these truths to finally come to light." They left the mansion in the late afternoon as the sun began to appear between the dispersing clouds. The trip to Riverside would take about an hour, giving Elizabeth time to mentally prepare for the most important meeting of her life. During the journey, Elizabeth shared more details about Benjamin, how he had been a brilliant student, how he always showed maturity beyond his years, and how his passion for helping others had manifested since he was very young. Marcus noticed that by talking about her son, Elizabeth was remembering all the positive aspects of his personality that had been overshadowed by their final argument. "Benjamin has always been very similar to me in temperament," said Elizabeth. "He is sensitive and intuitive, but also determined when he believes in a cause. I think that's why the argument was so intense. We both inherited the Carter family stubbornness." Marcus smiled upon hearing this. The admission that mother and son shared personality traits suggested there would be common ground for mutual understanding once the emotional barriers were removed. Arriving in Riverside, they easily found the Renewed Hope Social Assistance Center. It was a simple but well-kept building, located in a central area of town where it would be easily accessible to people in need. Several people were coming and going, confirming that the organization was active and well used by the community. Marcus parked across the street, giving Elizabeth an opportunity to observe the place where her son worked. Through the open windows, they could see people talking at tables, children playing in a designated area, and volunteers helping with various types of paperwork and guidance. "This is exactly the kind of environment Benjamin always dreamed of creating," said Elizabeth with admiration and pride. "Even as a teenager, he talked about places where people could receive help without judgment and with dignity. Do you want to go in now, or would you prefer to observe a little longer?" asked Marcus. Elizabeth was clearly nervous but also eager to proceed. "Let's go in. If I stay here thinking too much, I'll lose my nerve." They crossed the street and entered the community center. The atmosphere was welcoming and organized, with informational posters about various social programs and photographs of community events. A young receptionist greeted them cordially. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" she asked. Elizabeth hesitated, so Marcus took the initiative. "We're looking for Benjamin Carter. It's an important family matter." The receptionist smiled. "Benjamin is in a meeting at the moment, but should be finished in a few minutes. Would you like to wait?" Elizabeth nodded, and they sat in comfortable chairs in the waiting area. Marcus noticed there were several photographs on the wall showing the center's activities, and in many of them appeared a man who was clearly Benjamin, older than when he left home, but with the same kind eyes Elizabeth had described. "That's him," murmured Elizabeth, discreetly pointing to one of the photographs. "He looks more mature, but it's definitely my Benjamin." Marcus could see the emotion on her face upon seeing her son after 15 years, even if only in photographs. Benjamin seemed happy in the images, always surrounded by people of different ages who clearly respected and appreciated him. A few minutes later, they heard voices coming from a side hallway, and Marcus noticed that Elizabeth immediately tensed up. One of the voices was clearly male and mature, likely belonging to Benjamin. When Benjamin appeared at the reception, the emotional impact was immediate and intense. He was accompanied by an elderly couple, apparently clients he was helping, but his attention quickly turned to the visitors in the waiting area. The recognition was instant. Benjamin stopped abruptly when he saw Elizabeth, his expression rapidly changing from confusion to surprise, and then to something that could be described as defensive caution. It was evident that seeing his mother after 15 years was as shocking for him as it was for her. "Mother?" he said hesitantly, as if unsure he was seeing correctly. Elizabeth stood up slowly, her legs trembling slightly. "Hello, Benjamin. You look well." The initial conversation was extremely tense and formal. 15 years of separation had created a barrier of strangeness that would be difficult to overcome quickly. Marcus observed that both mother and son were struggling to find the right words for a situation neither had anticipated. "What are you doing here?" asked Benjamin, not rudely, but clearly confused and possibly defensive. "I need to talk to you," said Elizabeth, her voice firmer than Marcus expected. "I've discovered some important things about your father, about us, that changed everything I thought about what happened." Benjamin looked around, realizing they were in a public space with other people watching. "Perhaps we should talk in private," he said, indicating a side room. "I can give you 15 minutes. Marcus decided to remain in the reception area to give the family privacy, but Elizabeth called to him. "Marcus, please come with us. You helped me understand these discoveries, and perhaps you can help explain them too." In the private room, Elizabeth immediately took out the folder with William's letters. Benjamin watched with curiosity and some suspicion as she arranged the documents on the table. "These are letters your father wrote over the years," began Elizabeth. "I discovered them today, hidden in the attic. He never showed them to me, and I never knew they existed." Benjamin leaned in to examine the letters, his expression gradually changing from skepticism to genuine interest. Marcus could see that he was recognizing his father's handwriting and realizing this was authentic correspondence. "Father wrote letters to me?" asked Benjamin, his voice showing a vulnerability he had tried to hide. "Many letters," confirmed Elizabeth. "Letters asking for forgiveness, explaining his feelings, and confessing that you were right about everything from the beginning." Elizabeth opened the first letter from the stack addressed to Benjamin and handed it to her son. Marcus observed Benjamin's expression change dramatically as he read the words of remorse and acknowledgement that his father had never been able to say in person. "When did he write this?" asked Benjamin, checking the date. "1 year after you left home," replied Elizabeth. "And there are letters from every year since. He never stopped thinking about you, never stopped regretting the argument." Benjamin continued reading, and Marcus could see tears forming in his eyes. 15 years of hurt and resentment were being confronted by evidence that his father had truly loved and repented, even if he had never found the courage to admit it directly. "Why did he never send me these letters?" asked Benjamin, his voice choked. "Out of pride," admitted Elizabeth. "The same pride that kept me from reaching out to you all these years. Your father was a good man, but he was raised believing that admitting fault was a sign of weakness." Elizabeth then showed Benjamin the letters about William's secret philanthropic activities. Benjamin's reaction to these revelations was even more intense, as they demonstrated that his father had not only changed his mind, but had begun to act according to the values Benjamin had championed. "Dad was donating money to charity?" asked Benjamin in surprise. "For the last 5 years," confirmed Elizabeth, "to organizations exactly like this one where you work. He was secretly doing what you wanted to do with the family money." This revelation clearly struck Benjamin deeply. Marcus could see that he was completely re-evaluating his understanding of his father, and the events that led to the family separation. The discovery that William had secretly supported his ideas was breaking down the barriers of resentment Benjamin had built over the years. Elizabeth then handed over the final letter that William had written for them both. "This is the last letter your father wrote before he died. It's addressed to both of us." Benjamin read the letter in silence, and Marcus watched his expression go through several emotional transformations. When he finished, tears were openly streaming down his face, and all the defensiveness he had initially shown had disappeared. "He really was sorry," said Benjamin, more to himself than to the others. He finally understood. "And there's one more thing," Elizabeth said carefully. "Your father left instructions for a significant portion of the family inheritance to be specifically allocated to support your social work. He wanted you to know that your ideas were always valuable." This final revelation seemed to completely break down Benjamin's emotional barriers. He stood up, and after 15 years of separation, hugged his mother for the first time since he was a 22-year-old young man. The embrace lasted several minutes, and Marcus discreetly stepped away to give them privacy. When mother and son finally separated, they were both crying, but they were tears of relief and reconciliation, not of sadness. "Mom," said Benjamin, "I've missed you every single day for these 15 years. I wanted to come home so many times, but I was afraid I wouldn't be welcome." "And I wanted to reach out to you," Elizabeth replied, "but I was afraid you would never forgive me for the cruel things I said that day." Marcus realized that they had both carried similar regrets and longings throughout all the years of separation, but pride and fear had prevented either from taking the initiative for reconciliation. William's letters had provided the necessary catalyst to break that stalemate. "Tell me about your life," Elizabeth requested. "About Jennifer, about the children, about everything I've missed." Benjamin smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "Jennifer is wonderful and you will love her. The children, well, they always asked about their grandparents. I never knew what to say." "And now?" asked Elizabeth hopefully. "Now I want them to meet the grandmother they always deserved to have," said Benjamin firmly. "And I want you to be part of our lives again." Marcus smiled upon hearing this. The reconciliation was happening more smoothly than anyone had dared to hope. William's letters had not only provided evidence of a change of heart, but had also created common ground for mother and son to restart their relationship. "Can I meet them today?" asked Elizabeth anxiously. "Of course," replied Benjamin. "Actually, Jennifer should be picking up the kids from school in a few minutes. If you'd like to come with me there, I can introduce you." The prospect of meeting her grandchildren for the first time was clearly moving Elizabeth beyond words. Marcus could see she was nervous, but extremely excited about the possibility of finally meeting the children she had missed seeing grow up. They left the community center together, and Marcus noticed how the dynamic between mother and son had completely changed in just an hour. Where there had been tension and formality before, there was now cautious but genuine affection. They were clearly trying to reconnect 15 years of lost life. During the walk to the school, Benjamin talked about his wife, Jennifer, and how they met during their social work studies. He described his daughters, Emily, who is 8, and Ethan, who is 5, with the evident pride of a dedicated father. "Emily is a lot like me when I was a child," said Benjamin, "always worried about other people and wanting to help. Ethan is more like Jennifer, outgoing and full of energy." Elizabeth listened to everything with intense attention, clearly trying to absorb as much information as possible about the grandchildren she was about to meet. Marcus could see she was both excited and nervous about how the children would react to a grandmother who suddenly appeared in their lives. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out now. Continuing. Arriving at the school, they waited in the yard where parents usually picked up their children. Marcus watched other families gathering and realized how the everyday scenes of family affection must have been painful for Elizabeth, reminding her of all the moments she had missed with her grandchildren. When Jennifer appeared with the 2 children, the first reaction was confusion. She clearly recognized Benjamin, but was surprised to see him accompanied by people she didn't know. Benjamin quickly approached her to explain the situation before the children noticed anything unusual. Marcus could hear Benjamin quickly explaining to his wife about the discovery of the letters and the reconciliation with his mother. Jennifer listened with an expression of growing surprise, occasionally looking in the direction of Elizabeth and Marcus. The children, meanwhile, watched the unfamiliar adults curiously. Emily, the older one, seemed to be trying to figure out who these people were and why her father was talking so seriously with her mother. Ethan, the younger one, was more interested in playing with the other children in the yard. Finally, Benjamin and Jennifer approached with the children. Jennifer extended her hand to Elizabeth with a warm but cautious smile. "Jennifer, this is my mother, Elizabeth," said Benjamin, his voice filled with emotion. "Mom, this is Jennifer, the wonderful woman who helped me build a family." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," said Jennifer sincerely. "Benjamin has spoken about you a lot over the years. We always knew this moment would come someday." Elizabeth was surprised to hear this. "He talked about me." "Constantly," confirmed Jennifer. "Especially when the children asked about their grandparents, he always said that one day you would reconcile." This revelation deeply touched Elizabeth. Knowing that Benjamin had held on to hope for reconciliation throughout all the years of separation showed that he had never truly given up on the family, even after the painful argument. Then came the moment Elizabeth had anxiously anticipated, meeting her grandchildren. Benjamin knelt down to the children's level and called them over. "Emily, Ethan," he said gently, "I want you to meet someone very special. This is Grandma Elizabeth, your daddy's mother." Emily, being older and more understanding, immediately grasped the importance of the moment. Her eyes widened with surprise and excitement. "The grandma Daddy always talked about? The one who lived far away?" "That's the one," confirmed Benjamin, smiling at Elizabeth. Ethan, being younger, went straight to the point. He approached Elizabeth and examined her curiously. "Why didn't you come visit us before?" The child's innocent question hit Elizabeth emotionally. How to explain 15 years of family separation to a 5-year-old without creating resentment or confusion? "Because sometimes adults make mistakes and take a long time to fix them," said Elizabeth with age-appropriate honesty. "But now I'm here and I hope I can be part of your lives." Emily, showing maturity beyond her years, stepped forward and took Elizabeth's hand. "Daddy always said you were a good person who was away because of misunderstandings. I'm glad you fixed things." Marcus was impressed by the child's wisdom. It was evident that Benjamin had prepared his daughters for the possibility of family reconciliation, presenting their grandmother in a positive light even during the years of separation. Ethan, less interested in the emotional complexities of the situation, wanted to know more practical things. "Grandma, are you coming to our house? Do you know how to make cookies? Grandma Jennifer makes really yummy cookies." The mention of another grandmother momentarily confused Elizabeth, but Jennifer quickly explained. "My mother lives here in Riverside and helps a lot with the children. The children call her Grandma Jennifer to tell the difference." Elizabeth nodded understandingly. It was natural that the children had developed close relationships with their maternal grandparents during her absence. She would have to find her own place in the extended family without trying to compete with already established relationships. "Of course I can learn to make cookies," Elizabeth replied to Ethan. "In fact, I used to make delicious cookies for your daddy when he was little like you." "Daddy liked cookies when he was little?" asked Emily curiously. "He loved them," confirmed Elizabeth, smiling at the memory. "Especially chocolate chip cookies I made on special occasions." Marcus observed how these small conversations were naturally creating bonds between grandmother and grandchildren. The children were open and curious, making the emotional connection Elizabeth had feared would be difficult to establish much easier. Jennifer suggested they all go home to talk better in a more private setting. "The children are more comfortable at home, and we can have a proper conversation without the distractions of the street." During the walk to Benjamin's house, Marcus observed how the group was naturally organizing itself like a reunited family. Elizabeth walked between her grandchildren, answering their constant questions with patience and evident joy. Benjamin and Jennifer talked about practical aspects of how to integrate Elizabeth into the family routine. Benjamin's house was simple but welcoming, reflecting the values of simplicity and functionality he had upheld since his youth. It was evident the family lived comfortably but without excess, directing resources toward genuine needs rather than unnecessary luxuries. "This is our home," said Benjamin with pride. "It's small, but it's full of love." Elizabeth looked around with admiration. Family photographs decorated the walls, children's books were scattered in the living room, and toys indicated the house was truly a home where children were happy. It was exactly the kind of warm environment she had hoped Benjamin would create. "It's perfect," Elizabeth said sincerely. "I can feel it's a happy home." Jennifer prepared coffee and snacks for everyone, and they sat in the living room to continue the reconciliation conversations. The children quickly grew accustomed to the presence of their newly discovered grandmother, especially after Elizabeth began telling stories about Benjamin's childhood. "Was Daddy mischievous when he was little?" asked Ethan. "Very mischievous," confirmed Elizabeth, casting a loving glance at Benjamin. "Once he decided he wanted to help by painting the house fence, but he painted the neighbor's dog too." The children laughed delightedly at the story, and Marcus noticed that Elizabeth was finding her rhythm as a grandmother. Her stories not only entertained the children, but also established connections between the present and the family's past. Benjamin and Jennifer took a few moments while the children were distracted to talk more seriously with Elizabeth about practical matters. They wanted to better understand her current situation and how she would like to be involved in the family's life. "How are you living now?" Jennifer asked gently. "Benjamin told me you have a large mansion in the mountain region." "Very large and very lonely," admitted Elizabeth. "Since William passed, the house has become a difficult place for me. It's full of memories, but empty of life." "Have you ever thought about moving closer to us?" asked Benjamin. "Not necessarily into the same house, but to Riverside or some nearby town." The suggestion clearly appealed to Elizabeth, but she also hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden to you or interfere with the life you've built. You have established routines and relationships." "Mother," Benjamin said firmly, "you would never be a burden. On the contrary, it would be wonderful to have you nearby. The children need to know their paternal grandmother, and I've missed you all these years." Jennifer agreed enthusiastically. "It would be great for the children to have more family nearby. They love their grandparents, and having an additional grandmother would only be beneficial." Marcus noticed the conversation was naturally evolving into discussions about the future of the reunited family. The reconciliation wasn't just about resolving issues from the past, but about building positive relationships for the future. "There's something else I should tell you," Elizabeth said carefully, "about the inheritance your father left to support your social work. The amount is significant and could allow you to expand your activities at the community center." Benjamin was clearly surprised by the magnitude of the inheritance. "How much are we talking about?" Elizabeth mentioned the figure, and both Benjamin and Jennifer were impressed. It was enough money to significantly transform the reach and impact of the social work Benjamin was doing. "Dad really left all that for my work?" Benjamin asked with awe. "He specified he wanted to support your social welfare activities," confirmed Elizabeth. It was his way of finally admitting you were always right about using family resources to help other people. The conversation about the inheritance naturally led to discussions about Benjamin's future plans for the community center. With additional resources, he could expand existing programs, hire more staff, and perhaps even open a second location in a nearby town. "I've always dreamed of creating a residential program for families in transition," said Benjamin thoughtfully, "a place where people could stay temporarily while they sort out housing or employment issues." "That sounds exactly like something your father would have wanted to support," said Elizabeth. "He wrote in one of his letters about how impressed he was with your dedication to helping families in need." Marcus observed how the discovery of the inheritance was creating positive possibilities for the future, transforming the tragedy of family separation into an opportunity for expanded social impact. It was as if William, even after his passing, was contributing to values he had initially rejected. The children, who had played relatively quietly during the adults' conversation, returned to engage with their grandmother. Emily approached with a drawing she had made. "Grandma, I made a picture of our family," she said, showing the paper with pride. Marcus observed the drawing and was touched by what he saw. Emily had drawn a simple house with figures representing the whole family, including Elizabeth as Grandma Elizabeth, clearly labelled. The child had instinctively included the grandmother in her depiction of the family, even having met her only a few hours before. "It's beautiful," said Elizabeth with a choked voice. "May I keep it?" "Of course," replied Emily. "I'll make more drawings for you to take to your house." Ethan also wanted to contribute to the connection with his grandmother. "Grandma, do you want to see my room? I have lots of cool toys." Elizabeth gladly accompanied the children to learn more about the house and their daily lives. Marcus remained in the living room with Benjamin and Jennifer, giving the family some private time to reconnect. "It's surreal," said Benjamin to Marcus. "This morning I was a man who had lost touch with his birth family. Tonight, my mother is meeting my daughters and my home. If you hadn't helped her discover those letters—" "The letters were there waiting to be found," replied Marcus. "Perhaps they just needed the right moment and the right people for the truths to come to light." Jennifer added her perspective. "Benjamin always spoke of the family with longing, especially about his mother. He carried guilt for having left home so abruptly, even knowing it was necessary at the time. And now," asked Marcus. "Now we can finally build the family that should have always existed," said Benjamin with determination, "without pride, without misunderstandings, without fear of expressing true feelings." When Elizabeth returned from exploring the house with the children, it was evident she had completely fallen in love with her grandchildren. Her eyes shone with a joy Marcus hadn't seen since he met her during the storm. "They are wonderful children," said Elizabeth to Benjamin and Jennifer. "Smart, affectionate, well-mannered. You have done an excellent job as parents." "They definitely inherited their father's generous heart," said Jennifer, smiling at Benjamin. The evening was growing late, and Marcus realized it was time to allow the family private time to continue reconnecting. He prepared to say goodbye, but Elizabeth stopped him. "Marcus, I cannot let you leave without properly expressing my gratitude," she said. "If you hadn't appeared during the storm, if you hadn't offered to help me with the attic, if you hadn't encouraged me to come here, none of this would have happened." "Sometimes we are instruments for something greater than ourselves," replied Marcus philosophically. "I am honored to have been part of this reconciliation." Benjamin also expressed sincere gratitude. "You helped our family heal from wounds that lasted 15 years. We have no words to properly thank you." Marcus said goodbye to the family and departed, knowing he had witnessed something truly special. The storm that had forced him to seek shelter had resulted in the reunion of a family and the resolution of years of misunderstandings and pain. During his journey back home, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. A storm, an unexpected shelter, forgotten letters, and revealed truths had combined to create one of the most touching family reconciliation stories he had ever witnessed. More importantly, Marcus realized the experience had also changed his own perspective on family relationships. Observing the pain of separation and the joy of reconciliation had given him a new appreciation for the importance of maintaining family connections and not allowing misunderstandings to destroy precious relationships. In the following days, Marcus kept in touch with the family, curious about how the reconciliation would continue to develop. Elizabeth called him a few days later, her voice full of joy as she told him about the positive developments. "Benjamin and Jennifer have invited me to dinner twice this week," she said enthusiastically. "The children are calling me Grandma Elizabeth, and Emily has already made me 3 new drawings to hang in my house." Marcus smiled, hearing the progress. "And what about your plans to move closer to the family?" "I'm looking for a small house in Riverside," Elizabeth replied. "I don't want to sell the family mansion yet, but I want a place of my own here near the grandchildren. Benjamin offered for me to stay with them temporarily, but I believe it's important for everyone to have their own space." The decision showed wisdom on Elizabeth's part. She was working to integrate herself into the family's life in a way that respected the already established dynamics and relationships, rather than trying to force immediate or dramatic changes. "And the community center?" asked Marcus. "Benjamin is working with the lawyer to access the funds that William left," said Elizabeth. "He has amazing plans to expand the programs. I'm thinking of getting involved as a volunteer too if they want my help." The idea of Elizabeth getting involved in Benjamin's social work was perfect. It would not only give her purpose and activity, but would also allow her and her son to work together on causes they both considered important. A few weeks later, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. Elizabeth was organizing a family dinner to officially celebrate the reconciliation and wanted him to attend as the guest of honor. "Without you, none of this would have happened," Elizabeth said when she called to invite him. "You are part of this story, and we want you to be part of our celebration too." Marcus gladly accepted the invitation. On the appointed day, he arrived at the new house Elizabeth had rented in Riverside. It was small but charming, located just a few blocks from Benjamin's house. She had decorated it with some special pieces from the family mansion, creating an atmosphere that honored the past while embracing the future. The dinner was a wonderful gathering. Besides Marcus, Benjamin, Jennifer, the children, and the children's maternal grandparents were also present. The couple Marcus had briefly seen at the community center. The atmosphere was one of genuine celebration and family joy. During dinner, Benjamin made a special toast. "I want to thank Marcus for being the catalyst for our family reconciliation, and my mother for having the courage to seek the truth and to come to me with honesty and humility." Elizabeth responded with her own toast. "I want to thank my son for forgiving me, Jennifer for welcoming me into her family with open arms, and my granddaughters for accepting a grandma who suddenly appeared in their lives." Marcus observed the children during dinner and was impressed by how quickly they had adapted to the presence of the new grandmother. Emily often addressed Elizabeth with questions and comments, while Ethan had clearly adopted her as another special person in his life. After dinner, Elizabeth showed Marcus some photographs she had organized since the reconciliation. They were images of the family mansion, of Benjamin as a child, and of happy family moments from before the separation. She was creating an album to show the grandchildren, helping them understand their family history. "I want the children to know their family's past," said Elizabeth. "The good parts, at least. When they're older, I can explain about the difficult years, but for now I want them to see that there was always love in our family, even when it was temporarily lost." Marcus admired the wisdom of this approach. Elizabeth was building a family narrative that honored both the joys and the hardships, but presented everything in an age-appropriate way for the children. "And William's letters?" asked Marcus. "I've kept them all carefully," replied Elizabeth. "One day, when Benjamin is ready, we'll read them all together. There are so many truths in William's words that can help our family understand each other better." Before Marcus left that night, Benjamin pulled him aside for a private conversation. "I want to make a proposal," he said. "We're expanding the community center and need someone to coordinate outdoor activity programs for struggling families. You would be perfect for the position." The offer surprised Marcus. Outdoor activities for families, therapeutic hikes, family camping, programs where parents and children can reconnect through experiences in nature, explained Benjamin. "With your experience as a guide and what you've demonstrated in helping our family, I believe it would be a perfect job for you." Marcus was intrigued by the possibility. For years he had used his skills in the mountains mainly for tourist entertainment. The opportunity to use those same skills for positive social impact was appealing. "Can I think about it?" asked Marcus. "Of course," replied Benjamin. "But remember, you've already proven to be excellent at helping families reconnect. This would just be a formal extension of what you did naturally with us." During his trip back home, Marcus seriously considered Benjamin's offer. The experience with the Carter family had changed his perspective on his own purpose in life. Perhaps it was time to use his skills for something more meaningful than just guiding tourists. A few weeks later, Marcus called Benjamin and accepted the offer. "I want to be part of the positive impact you're creating in the community," he said, "and I believe working with families on reconnection would be extremely rewarding." The decision marked the beginning of a new phase in Marcus's life. He began developing innovative programs that combined outdoor activities with family therapy, helping other families overcome their own communication and relationship difficulties. Months later, Marcus often reflected on that storm that had changed so many lives. If he hadn't sought shelter in that seemingly abandoned mansion, if Elizabeth hadn't needed help exploring the attic, If William's letters hadn't been discovered, the entire trajectory of multiple lives would have been different. The Carter family's reconciliation became an inspiring story in the local community. Elizabeth often told others about the importance of not giving up on family, even when relationships seem irreparably damaged. Her story encouraged other families to seek reconciliation in their own difficult situations. Benjamin significantly expanded the community center's programs using William's inheritance. The new residential program for families in transition became a model for other communities, and the organization received regional recognition for its innovative work. The children, Emily and Ethan, grew up knowing their full family history, both the happy and the challenging parts. Elizabeth became a constant and loving presence in their lives, creating grandmother memories that made up for the lost years. Jennifer benefited from Elizabeth's addition to the family, as she now had extra support with the children and a mother-in-law who had become a true friend. The expanded family dynamic created a stronger support network for everyone. Marcus found renewed purpose in his work, helping other families through nature-based reconnection programs. His own relationship skills improved through his work with struggling families, and he developed a new appreciation for the importance of honest communication and forgiveness. The Carter family mansion eventually became a retreat center for families in the process of reconciliation. Elizabeth decided to transform the property into something that would honor both William's memory and Benjamin's values, creating a space where other families could work through their own difficulties. 1 year after the reconciliation, the family organized a special celebration on the first anniversary of their reunion. Marcus was again invited as the guest of honor, and this time there were even more people present: colleagues from the community center, families who had been helped by the expanded programs, and friends from the community who had been inspired by the reconciliation story. During the celebration, Elizabeth gave a speech that touched everyone present. "A year ago, I was a lonely woman living with regrets and painful memories. Today, I am a mother reunited with her son, a grandmother who knows her grandchildren, and a volunteer who found purpose in helping other families, all because a kind stranger offered me help during a storm." Benjamin added his own reflections. "I learned that it's never too late to forgive, and it's never too late to start over. My father may have passed before we could reconcile, but his letters showed us that love can persist, even through years of silence and misunderstanding." Marcus felt deeply honored to be part of this story of transformation. The experience had taught him that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life come when we least expect them, and that being open to helping others can create changes that go far beyond what we can imagine. The Carter family's story demonstrated that even the most damaged relationships can be healed with honesty, humility, and a willingness to forgive. William's letters became a testament that it's never too late to acknowledge mistakes and express love, even if it has to be done posthumously through written words. Years later, when Marcus reflected on that fateful storm, he always smiled to think how seemingly random events can be connected in mysterious ways. A storm, a mansion, forgotten letters, and open hearts had combined to create one of the most beautiful family redemption stories he had ever witnessed. The true treasure found in that mansion wasn't gold or money, but something far more valuable: proof that family love can survive any storm, and that it's never too late to rebuild bridges we thought were permanently burned. And sometimes, all we need is a kind stranger willing to help us uncover the truths that were hidden right in front of us. The Carter family's reconciliation continued to inspire other families in the region for many years, showing that even in the most desperate situations, there is always hope to start anew with love, forgiveness, and honest communication. End of story. Now, dear listeners, we want to know, what did you think of this family reconciliation story? Can you relate to the challenges the Carter family faced? Have you ever been in situations where pride almost destroyed important relationships? Leave your sincere comments about the emotions this story stirred in you. Your experiences and reflections help us create even better stories. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.